Our next guest knows firsthand about the challenges of moving legislation through a divided Congress. We want to bring in Eric Cantor. He is former House Majority Leader and now Vice Chairman and Managing Director at Moelis & Company. And Eric, we could talk about this being dead on arrival. This, again, didn't make it through when the Democrats were controlling all of the three houses. Probably not likely to make it through at this point, but there is a reason for the president to mention this in the State of the Union. What do you think that is?
Good morning, Becky. No, I think what we saw last night was clearly the rollout, if you will, initially of the president's reelection campaign. I mean, these are, just like Robert said, there's no way that any of these proposals that he talked about are going to pass. We have divided government in D.C., and some of us on my side of the partisan aisle are very glad that some of these very destructive type of policies in terms of economic growth are not going to get through.
Let's just talk about not just the wealth tax that he's mentioning here. Let's talk about a couple of the other things that we highlighted earlier in this program. One where he said that quadruple tax on stock buybacks is something he'd like to put into place. Another comment where he said, yeah, the oil industry is going to have to stick around for at least the next 10 years. I mean, we know this is theater. This is what every president does. They lay out bold, broad things, and it's probably easier to do that when you have a divided house of government. Which of these are things, though, that you think have any potential traction or do anything to change investment, the way investors behave in any of these environments?
Well, you know, first of all, let's just start with, again, the fact that there is divided government in Washington. And I've said before that there's going to be very little that gets done this Congress. We're in a presidential election cycle. There's a divided government. This president clearly demonstrated he wants to, score points politically. And so if you look at it from a market participant standpoint, I am most concerned about his laundry list of sectors that he is targeting, and that targeting will occur on the part of the administration, its agencies. You know, he listed pharma, big tech. He listed the airlines. He talked about resort fees. He talked about, as you say, energy companies. All of these sectors are going to be under attack on the part of the Biden administration, and that attack is going to come in the form of the rulemaking because he knows he's not getting any of this through the Congress.
I know he's not getting any of it through the Congress, but instead of looking at this from the political spectrum, let's just look at this, again, from the investing perspective, from Wall Street's perspective. When you have rhetoric about raising the tax so extremely on stock buybacks, what does that do? When you have commentary coming from the president about, yeah, the energy sector needing to be around for another 10 years, at least. He ad-libbed a little later. I mean, what does that do in terms of the investment that you're going to see going back into oil? What does that do in terms of companies thinking about how they make changes? Or do companies not make any changes until they actually see a law that they think is going to be passed?
Becky, I think all this has to do with the environment to put capital to work. And anytime you increase the price of risk, you're going to get less of risk and less of capital being invested. The energy sector moment in the speech was a case in point. The fact that he really believes that you can foresee the fact we're not going to use fossil fuels after the next 10 years, that says it right there. How are companies are going to sit here and talk to their shareholders and management talk to their shareholders when you've got a president that oversees the regulatory state, that oversees the permitting process, et cetera, in terms of the heavily CapEx oil and gas sector? How do you go in and in a prudent way put capital to work when you'll only have a couple of years left after all this permitting and approval process takes place in the energy sector? So that right there is the case in point. I think investors realize that you've got an administration that is somewhat hostile to capital formation and the expansion of wealth. I mean, and along with that comes jobs.